Windows 10 celebrating a big milestone here, turning 5 years old. Ed Bott with me here today to chat about this and ripping straight off of your headline, Ed. Turning 5 years old, but almost nothing turned out as planned. So, what was everyone expecting, and how has this turned out to be different?
Well, very little turned as planned, but that's okay because as it turned out, I guess having things change was the plan all along. This was, the product that we see today, 5 years after the launch back in mid 2015, product we see today is a lot more humble than the original vision that Microsoft had. Back then, I remember this classic image that they had showing all these devices from little tiny handheld phones and small tablets to PCs of all different sizes, going all the way up to the big gigantic Surface Hub that was going to be in office conference rooms. And the Windows Phone started disappearing around 2017, and at the end of 2019, Microsoft finally officially ended support for Windows phones completely. So Windows 10 Mobile doesn't really exist anymore. There were all these small tablets at the beginning of 2015 when Windows 10 came out, these 8-inch and 10-inch tablets, and they were going to be competitors to the iPad. And I don't think you can find any of those anymore. I still have a few in my office, and I've got a big box of Windows phones in my garage, but those don't exist anymore. It's pretty much just become conventional desktop PCs, conventional laptop PCs, and some really interesting two-in-one form factors. But those were that hardware vision changed, and the software vision changed as well. Back at the beginning of the Windows 10 era, you had Windows 10 apps, universal Windows platform apps that were going to be sold through the store, and then there were the legacy desktop apps that were going to be compatible with the two. Well, in the intervening 5 years, those two categories have really merged. And so these days you find Windows apps that are just as powerful as their counterparts on the desktop. And on the flip side of that, Microsoft has found a way with its MSI X strategy to get Windows desktop apps into the Microsoft Store. And so as a result, you have this very neat strategy of where you can sort of point people towards the store, and you can have both types of apps that get installed and serviced from the same place. I don't think anybody expected that when Windows 10 started 5 years ago. Then there was Windows as a service, which turned out to be more evolutionary than we expected. There were all these roadmaps that were explaining exactly what was going to happen. There is going to be a new feature update coming every 6 months like clockwork, and it'll install really easily, and there'll be all these milestones, and all of those things have evolved over 5 years. It was frustrating at first because things kept changing. You kept expecting that it was going to be like the old shrink-wrapped software, and it would just work the way that it did when you got it. But the rules kept changing. It seems to have settled into a rhythm right now, which sort of leads to the final thing, which is sort of a relief. The final thing that's different than it was back then, which is that the pace of development is nowhere near as frantic today as it was back then. We sort of forget that first version of Windows 10 came out in summer of 2015, and there was a major feature update in November of 2015, and then another one a year later, or in summer of 2016. And it was like, when are these going to come, and how much are they going to change things, and how much are they going to impact our deployment strategies? And what we've finally settled into, it appears, is strategy that is, you get a big new upgrade in the spring, so version 1903, and then a very small update at the end of the year, version 1909. There's a brand new version coming out now, version 2004, which we've talked about before. And then it looks like at the end of 2020, there's going to be another one of those small updates. And the key there is that instead of having to install those feature updates, you'll be able to skip them and go maybe every 18 months or so. And for enterprise customers, you can go every 30 months. It was pretty frantic at the beginning, but thankfully it's settled into a more leisurely and, most importantly, a predictable rhythm.
Yeah, most definitely. And if I recall here correctly, and in the very beginning, though, a lot of doom and gloom. I think a lot of people thinking there's going to be a catch, or just wait a second, there will be a catch here.
Well, sure. Everything about Windows 10 was new and different in 2015. And as a result, there were a bunch of conspiracy theories. There were even a few people, we won't mention them by name, but who actually built a small cottage industry on just pumping out a new conspiracy theory every couple weeks. There was one that I recall, which was that that the whole free upgrade offer was a trap. And at the end of the 1 year, Microsoft was going to start charging us for subscriptions. Well, guess what? Here it is 5 years later. They're not charging us for Windows 10 subscriptions. And in fact, the Windows 10 upgrades, the free upgrades, which supposedly ended a year after the launch in mid 2016, those are still, if you go to Microsoft's website, you can still get the free Windows 10 upgrades. They're still offering those, and that's still one of my most popular posts ever, 5 years later. There was another theory that was based on a misreading of a license agreement, that somehow Microsoft was going to have a kill switch and cut off support for old devices after a few years. Well, with one tiny technical exception for some underpowered devices running one particular Atom processor, that never happened either. And then there was sort of the mother of all conspiracy theories, which was that Windows 10 is just filled with spyware, and it's going to steal all of your personal information, feed it to Microsoft, and that's how they're going to make their money. And although there are a handful of people out there who still believe this is true, I still get it in the comments to some of my articles. Basically, this is the dog that didn't bark, because there are all these privacy activists out there. And if Windows 10 were such a sinkhole for our personal information, somebody would have found it by now. And more importantly, Microsoft would have started making money on it and reporting those profits in their annual reports. But they didn't, and they haven't. So, I'm sort of relieved that none of the conspiracy theories panned out.
Yeah, that is a good thing, and one less thing to worry about, right?
Right.
So since they didn't pan out and nothing else crazy like that, do you think, that Microsoft, their vision? Do you think that they accomplished what they were hoping to do with Microsoft or with Windows 10?
Well, I think so. A lot of the details, as we've discussed, might have turned out differently than, were on their original whiteboards. But I think there were two big jobs they had to do, and those have been accomplished in the past 5 years. The first job was, how in the movie Men in Black, they had the shiny stick, the neuralizer they held up that sort of wiped out your memory of something that you weren't supposed to have seen.
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft really needed one of those shiny, flashy things for Windows 8, because Windows 8 had been such a public relations disaster for them. It had been such a wrong turn for them that they really needed to overcome the bad memories of that. And I think they accomplished that. Nobody complains about Windows 8 anymore. And in fact, when I looked at the latest statistics, only about 4% of the Windows installed base is still running some version of Windows 8. So I think they did a pretty good job of erasing the memory of Windows 8, putting it aside, and moving on to something that people generally seem to like in Windows 10. The even more important job was to shrink the Windows 7 user base and give people something that they could upgrade from. And I know I was a little nervous at the end of 2019 when I looked at the usage statistics, because as we went into the fourth quarter, about 1 in 5 Windows PCs worldwide was still running uh, Windows 7. And as you probably remember, Microsoft ended support for Windows 7 in January of 2020, and that was cutting it pretty fine. But when I looked at the usage statistics as of mid-April 2020, that usage share had gone down to about 12.5%, or from 1 in 5 to about 1 in 8. That's a huge drop, and I think we're going to continue to see that drop. I know anecdotally, I've gotten a fair number of emails from people who say, now that I'm working from home, I took out an old Windows 7 PC and they found my article online about how to still get the free Windows 10 upgrade. And they were really relieved that they didn't have to pay for it and that it worked just fine on their older hardware. So I think you're going to see that one. You're going to see that one continue as 2020 goes on. I think there's probably a bit of relief in Redmond as Microsoft sees that that they're finally going to get that Windows 7 user base down to the single-digit percentages just a few months after ending support for Windows 7.
Yeah, most definitely. Very interesting here. So 5 years of Windows 10, Ed. I know you've got this great article up, and of course on ZDNet, you've been covering this for a long time. So many resources, of course, with Windows and all kinds of different issues there, all on ZDNet. This is definitely one of your favorite topics to write about. Am I right?
Absolutely. It's my bread and butter.
That it is. You are a wealth of knowledge, as always, Ed, for us here. And you can check out all of Ed's writings, of course, and much, much more there on ZDNet. And we thank you for watching.